right, thanks everyone for attending tonight. And I guess we have a pretty good crowd on Zoom as well. So thank you again. I'm Brian Doherty. I'm the Transportation Director at Montachusett Regional Planning Commission. And since December of 2023, we've been working closely with our project consultant, WSP International, who's here tonight to present on our safety action plan for the Montachusett region. So I know a lot of you are aware of what a safety action plan is. Essentially, we're trying to identify locations on roadways that pose some safety hazards and could benefit from some operational improvements. So all in an effort to work towards Vision Zero, which is zero fatalities and incapacitating injuries on our roadways. So over the last year and a half, these locations have been determined through extensive crash analysis and other factors, as well as consultation with community officials. So we're on schedule to have this plan in place in September when the Montachusett Metropolitan Planning Organization officially endorses it. The next phase is where we need some municipal buy-in. So when Federal Highway issues another round of funding, which we expect, and they've committed to at least one more round of funding, we anticipate that possibly next spring. All the projects that we identify within the plan will be qualified for federal funds. Are we all set?
Keep going. Keep talking.
Thank you. So as owners of those facilities, the communities will be responsible for spearheading those efforts and pursuing those funds. Our role as a regional planning agency will be fulfilled in qualifying these projects for funds. We'll transition to more of a supporting role. So that would mean, talking about what the process is, possibly assisting putting together applications for the funds, and also possibly soliciting any required matching funds through some of our resources. So if you're here tonight representing a community, I encourage you to think about how that may work in your town, who may champion those funds. The regional planning agencies are willing to work with you to pursue those funds. And tonight we'll hear an update on some of the specific project areas we've identified through the process. So again, thanks everyone for attending. We look forward to working with you over the next year or so. Thank you.
So good evening, folks. I am Nathaniel Curtis. I am the head of public involvement for WSP's Massachusetts practice. You'll be hearing from me tonight and our project manager, Bruce Kaplan. Tonight, I just want to go over a little bit of our Zoom controls for the folks at home, so you can see everything that you've got to do in case you want to ask us a question. My colleague Grant Olier will be monitoring the Zoom webinar, so when we get to the Q&A portion, you'll be able to participate fully. So if you have something that you need to ask, you've got the drop-down menu. You can raise your hand. We ask that you feel free to do so. If you're on the telephone, you can use *9. If you have a problem, we do have a phone number that you can dial. And the closed captioning is automatically generated by Zoom. We ask that you bear with us on that. It is an AI. It is trained on the West Coast. So for those of us who occasionally break out a Vaughan Meter accent, sometimes it has problems. So we just want you to know that as part of documenting what we're doing, this Zoom recording is being made. We hope you're comfortable with that. If you're not, just don't ask a question, I guess. You can always email it to us. But we do want to notify that you are being recorded. Your microphone's automatically disabled right now. We'll turn it on when we get to that part of the meeting, just so that the Zoom doesn't break out into chaos. We'll have plenty of time to talk at the end. We will work through this presentation as quickly as possible.
Recording in progress.
There it goes. We welcome your questions. just please be respectful. Reading anything word for word is boring, but this is important because this is a statement of values by our client and one that I happen to personally agree with. The Montachusett Regional Planning Commission, MRPC, operates its programs, services, and activities in compliance with federal non-discrimination law, including Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, 1964, Title VI, the Civil Rights Restoration Act of 1987, and related statutes and regulations. Title VI prohibits discrimination in federally assisted programs and requires that no person in the United States of America shall, on the grounds of race, color, or national origin, including limited English proficiency, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be otherwise subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal assistance. And if you want more information, that is where you can find it on MRPC's website. So this is who you'll be hearing from tonight. You've heard from Brian, you're hearing from me, you'll hear from Bruce. On Zoom is Dominic Privatera. He is one of our traffic engineers. If anybody has questions about why we applied a given treatment to a given location, Dominic would be the guy to answer it, because I know just enough about this stuff to get myself in deep trouble. So we're kind of through this. We're going to be moving on to item 2. The guts of tonight is really 3 and 4, and then we'll be getting to number 5 before we get to Q&A. One thing that I wanted to note is we have a large number of projects. There are 22 communities in the MRPC region. Just to get you out of here before midnight, part of what we do is when we get to that part, we will be, I know we have people here from Leominster and Fitchburg. Once we get to that part, I will go to the back of the room and check up on where we have people from. We will go over those towns in detail where we have people from the audience. For towns where we don't have someone in the audience, we'll just kind of give the overview slide. But these slides will be posted, so if your town wasn't covered in detail and you want to look later, you will be able to do so. Just going to whip through this quickly. You've seen this in more detail if you've been following this process. This is how we publicize this meeting. We do have members of our Vision Zero committee, which is an important part of our process, in the audience tonight, and we thank them for their participation. The public access channels in a number of the communities carried our information beginning at the beginning of the month. We had it on the project website at the beginning of the month. You've been getting spammed by me for weeks now, so I appreciate your forbearance. We had newsprint emails. The Fitchburg Sentinel and Enterprise, I would like to call out in particular for their email blast to 30,000 homes on the 10th. Apparently we got very good click-through rates, so I think that may be contributing to some of the turnout tonight. Our partners in this, the transit agency began boosting our signal, carrying this on transit vehicles on the 4th. And if you got a flyer from us in the past, we emailed you. So just wanted to get the word out. We are serious about trying to get people to participate in this process. So what is SS4A? It connects Vision Zero, which is the idea that we should get to a point of there being no traffic fatalities or serious injuries. Equity, the idea that that should be applied to everybody. And climate goals, the idea that we should try and slow down climate change. There are 3 separate funding programs that fund Vision Zero. One is for comprehensive safety action plans, which is where we are now. One is for supplemental planning, which is to say, okay, I want to investigate something more from my safety action plan. And one is for implementation. That is when you actually go out and put something in the ground. There's secondary benefits, equity. Typically, we see that disadvantaged communities, that could be low English proficiency, that could be senior citizens, that could be veterans, that could be people with chronic health conditions. They're often overrepresented in chronic, or rather roadway fatalities. Multimodal mobility, that means places where there's lack of adequate pedestrian and bicycle facilities. In your region, that actually also can mean places where agricultural machinery is moving and has to share space with fast-moving cars. And then climate change. Investment in safe, non-motorized infrastructure helps to encourage mode shift and lower vehicle miles traveled. So the study outcomes, one of the neat things is when I looked at this slide, which we've been carrying since the beginning, and one of the reasons I'm going through this, even though it's an old slide, is just in case there are new people in our audience. When you go through as much of an outreach process as we have done, there's always the risk that there's somebody who this is their first meeting. We have a number of these things. We have this, we have that, we have this, and we have the beginning of that, and some of these too. So we've made a lot of progress. So our project team is a four-legged stool. I like to put up this picture because these stools have been kicking around my family's house since I was a little kid. My aunt was an interior designer, and she bought 1,000 of these things, and there's just always been one in my house. MRPC and Mart, they're the partnership. They lead this process. They manage the consultant team. They own the Regional Vision Zero Action Plan when it is complete. The VZAC, or the Vision Zero Action Committee, they're kind of our working group. They're composed of local representation. They inform the planning process of local knowledge, and they have been working through the detail with us. The consultant team, we support the planning process. That's us, that's Bruce, who you hear about, that's Grant, who supports me. And then there's the public. That's all of you. You provide us a reality check. You tell us, you know, it's great that you came up with all these models, but you missed a spot over there. Fill that in. So what have we been doing since the last time we saw the public, which is all the way back in October? So at the last public information meeting, which was over in Fitchburg, I kind of butchered a Winston Churchill quote, but I said it was the end of the beginning. At that point, we had a really solid grasp of the study area conditions, right? We had this literature review, we had a detailed crash analysis, we'd gone back over 5 years of crash data from 2019 to 2023, because that was the last 5 years for which the traffic data had settled. It took account of both before COVID, during COVID, and the recovery therefrom. We had a systemic analysis, we had the high-risk analysis. We really had the tools in hand to begin targeting areas for improvements and projects, and that was a waypoint for the public to weigh in and say, okay, these are the tools we're going to use to go and think about projects. Tell us if these tools are okay. Are you comfortable with them? Because this is how we're going to come up with projects. So this is the last 8 months, and this is the high-level version. So November to December, we revised some key work products. There was a Vision Zero policy statement, which I'll go over in a minute, that was drafted and presented to the Metropolitan Planning Organization. The reason that that's important is you have to have adopted that Vision Zero policy statement to go out and get funds to implement these projects. So the fact that you've looked at a draft and the MPO has adopted one, that means that when the next round of funding comes up, you're in a posture to go and apply for those funds. You're going to hear more about this, but we actually developed a questionnaire which we attempted to speak with each one of MRPC's communities and ask them about their own local safety projects. You'll know why that's important in a few minutes. That was January. In February, the results from those questionnaires began to come in, which allowed us to begin developing potential projects. In March of 2025, more results flowed in, more project development. This prioritization matrix, which Bruce will talk about, we talked that through with MRPC, and later on showed that to the VZAC. That was later adopted at VZAC number 4 in April. We continued to bring in more results from the different communities from those questionnaires, which were sent back out in January. We actually have some people here who participated in our municipal meetings in May. So in May, we tried to have a virtual meeting from the Tuesday after Memorial Day to the Friday after Memorial Day with each and every one of the municipalities, ideally with the representative that answered the questionnaire, to say, okay, this is what the data told us, this is what you told us, this is what we think your project should be, what do you think? Tonight, when you look at the projects that Bruce is going to talk you through, those projects are the result of that effort. Early June, we had a list of potential projects that we shortened based on municipal input. The outreach for this meeting took place, and that brings us to tonight. We are happy to deep dive on any of this, but we want to get to the projects. There's a joke in this slide title. The bus has the high beams on. Tried for a laugh. So there's been a lot of work over the last 8 months. The focus tonight is on that work which flows directly into the potential projects or supports their eventual implementation. Vision Zero policy, right? For those of you who have been in this process in the past, it's aligned to the Vision Zero Action Committee's March 2024 guiding principles. Those are available from our website if you'd like to look at them. The thing that makes this important, it's a critical output for SS4A. It allows pursuit of additional funds in the 2026 funding cycle. What is it? It's a publicly adopted policy. It has a data-driven goal. It commits you to progress towards the goal by tracking by the adopted organization. There was a draft presented to the MPO in December of 2024. It was adopted in 2025. It has a ton of words. It makes lousy PowerPoint. But this is really the heart of it. The 70% reduction in crashes causing fatalities or serious injury by 2050, with the goal of creating a thriving and resilient region where everyone can travel safely and confidently on our streets. And there's sub-goals underneath this, but everything is clustered under promote a traffic safety culture, accountability and transparency, acknowledging a diverse region, using data-driven decision-making, maintaining and building safe infrastructure, prioritizing equity and inclusion, and doing it with some rapidity. So this is the priority network. You heard me talk about the high risk and the high injury network. The high injury network, that was retrospective data. That was based on that 2019 to 2023 crash data. That's historical. The high risk network was a predictive tool, saying, okay, if we know where the crashes have been happening, how might we create a tool that would suggest where might we see future crashes that haven't happened already? The priority network basically says, okay, if I take those two tools and blend them together, where might I look to create safety projects or interventions that would address these issues? And what it does is it assigns parts of the roadway network a priority. And you can see it gives everything kind of this, you've got this 4 levels of priority. There's priority 1 and 2, which gets kind of a hit from both networks, right? It popped on the high injury or the high risk. That's 1 and 2. 3, it got 1. So it's kind of borderline. And 4, it only appeared in one, but not the other. So 1 and 2, you really want to hit. 3, 4, definitely get close to the edge. And neither, not included. Don't worry too much about this. This is harder to see. What's more important is this. This is our initial prioritization network. And I know the TV, we've got to keep the lights on a bit for the folks who might be watching on public access. It does wash it out a bit. But you can see that this ranges from a very deep red through a slightly less deep red through an orange to kind of a gently yellow. This was our initial prioritization network. We had this sort of around December, January, after blending that high-risk network, the predictive tool, and the high injury network, the retrospective tool. So that leads us into January of 2025 and those community conversations, the municipal questionnaires that I talked about. What we didn't want to do was just take this map alone and say, okay, that's it, that's where we'll go do our projects. Because what that could have done was led us down the road of proposing projects for places where MassDOT might have already had a project that they'd recently installed, or that they had one in planning, where your MPO had a project recently installed or had one in planning. Those we could find by looking on the internet because there are GIS layers for that. What we really wanted to drill down to is, are there town-led projects? Because those aren't there, right? You can't necessarily find those on the internet. What we didn't want to do is do all this work and then go to a municipality and say, we think you should put curb extensions at the intersection of Washington and Main Street, and have the DPW director say, that's great, Mr. Consultant, very smart. I put them there 6 months ago. Go back to the drawing board. It was our goal to avoid that kind of an embarrassing moment. So we spoke with 21 of the 22 MRPC communities. We nearly got them all, nearly a clean sweep. The goal was to ensure that we wouldn't propose projects where one was just completed or propose something where something was already in planning. We asked about recently completed safety projects or currently planned safety projects. We asked them, hey, what do you know about local problem spots? We asked about countermeasures, safety improvement tool preferences. Are there things that your community has tried for safety improvements that you either didn't like? You know, the community didn't like it. It was out of keeping with your character as a community. You know, it didn't fit. It was very urban and you're rural, for example. One of the things that came up is people have a lot of concerns about trucks. So we looked about where there might be additional warehouse capacity coming online. And because there is one more round of grant funding available from the federal government, we asked about individual municipalities' capacity to support grant writing. So this is the projects. So this is where I'm going to bring Bruce up. He's going to get into these in just a moment. But I just want to leave you with a couple of key points. The technical analysis done to date, right? These projects come from somewhere, right? They come from that high injury network, the retrospective data, the high risk network, the predictive tool, a detailed crash analysis, that prioritization network, right? The comparison of the prioritization network to the known MassDOT and TIP, Transportation Improvement Program projects, all the conversations we had with the 21 communities that were willing to talk to us, and the initial review of the projects that we came up with those municipalities during that week of May 25th. They recommend either for locally controlled streets, specific interventions such as adding signs or changing how two roads meet, right? That's intersection geometry, or something called a road safety audit, which is effectively a study. If an intersection is very complicated or there's shared jurisdiction, this project is designed to work on local streets, not streets with state jurisdiction. But sometimes you may have a road where here's a state road and it's crossed by a town-owned road. Well, if that's the case, we propose one of these road safety audits to try and address some of the issues. So I'm going to hand this off to Bruce. I'm going to go to the back of the room, collect the sign-in sheets while he talks about countermeasures. Grant is going to figure out what towns we have on the computer. Countermeasures. I put the board behind this slide so you can talk about some of the things that people will see. Here, click it. You got to point it at it. There we go.
So this is by no means, first of all, I thanks again, and I'm the project manager, Bruce Kaplan. Thanks for everybody being here, coming out. Again, these are some of the safety countermeasures. By all means, this is not an exhaustive list. These are examples of kind of safety countermeasures. Again, whether putting down various sorts of surface treatment, whether it's a high friction thing, whether it's putting down wet reflective pavement marking or lighting to increase visibility at night. There's all different sort of signal timing to put in a pedestrian interval, to lengthen or shorten a yellow interval. We found that as a big concern, as well as timing in kind of tight intersections, and we'll get to those, especially in when we get to Fitchburg and Leominster, where you've got signal after signal after signal, and people get stuck, and that leads to crashes. Again, we've got other various things, signage enhancement, that includes everything from, as you see there, stop signs ahead to dangerous intersection coming up, which is a lot of what we saw in, a lot of the rural areas, potential for that, where there's an unsignalized intersection, but it would be perhaps good to have signage letting people know, hey, there's going to be a sharp merge up here that you might miss if you're on the main road. Again, various other sorts of signal stuff, whether it's backing plates, retro-reflective sort of stuff. Yes, Nate?
Here's the towns I got in the audience, and close to the microphone.
And close to the microphone. Okay. So we have 5 here. So we're going to do these 5 first before the folks online? Is that how we're...
I'll check with Red, and we'll see
Well,
what we got.
again, there's all different sorts of things. Again, greater visibility, signal upgrades. There's all different sorts of them. One of the more popular is the speed feedback signs. A good way to kind of reduce and let people know how fast they're going, and kind of, it's one sort of traffic calming technique. One of the things we know in various DPWs, again, we don't like to stereotype, but putting in permanent traffic humps and or other sorts of, changing the pavement is not something that people in the DPW like to do based on our climate here. That could affect and make the road even worse. So we're looking at other ways to kind of do things, perhaps with slowing people down with the feedback signs and scaring them and saying you're going too fast. Again, there's all different sorts of signage, which we may talk about, as when we get to it. Things like no turn on red signs. We have other sorts of blank out signs, which kind of let people know when it's safe to make a right-hand turn, shall we say, if there's not an actuated signal. Again, there's a lot of technology, but basically what we're doing here is you can kind of run the gamut, and all of these are proven safety countermeasures by that have been certified by US DOT. They all have various sort of, as we put it, crash reduction sort of associated with them. That you implement this, you can expect this fewer crashes based on that in this area. And there are other factors that go into it, length of mileage and what have you. But again, based on the problem areas that we saw, we came up with a number of areas and kind of techniques. And again, this is kind of a high-level technique and a high-level exercise we're doing here. Another thing that I do want to mention, which you're probably, in case you're new to this and scratching your head, is like, well, wait a minute, why aren't you looking at the highways? Again, as Brian said at the beginning, and as Nate kind of reiterated, this is SS4A is really designed for local roads. So even, as Nate had mentioned right before, MassDOT-owned facilities, which tend to be a fair number of roads in this area, that if you don't have jurisdiction over it, it's very difficult to change that in terms of working with MassDOT. That's why we were talking about having road safety audits when we were going to do that, and not, not. I think the rest of the list is coming. Now I have to alphabetize it. So
That's all right here. This one's alphabetized already.
okay.
So start there.
Oh wow, we have a lot
Yes, we're doing good.
We're doing good, because a bunch of the A's and the G's and this and oh wow. Okay, we can even start at the beginning. Ta-ta-da. So, again, thanks for we have this on a nice big safety board, but again, this is not an exhaustive list of what you're seeing. There's a lot, and there's many different types of access management or intersection geometry. It's not just, changing the way a curb is there, or, changing that in a parking lot. that's usually combined with turn lanes and maybe, and again, typically none of this stuff is done in a vacuum, right? It's not like we look at a problem and say, you know what, just do that one thing. There's a bunch of things we can do for it or propose doing. So without further ado, I think we're going to jump right in. So our first community is Ashburnham, which we have someone on the phone, on Zoom. So as you can see, we came up with 2 areas. Now again, you'll see other areas here, and you're like, wait a minute, this is all red. Yeah, but as you might see here, this was already a project that was done. We don't want to touch that. If that was done. And again, this is, as you know, Ashburnham, kind of more rural. We know that there's been a bunch of work that's been done here already, as we say here, new sidewalks and crosswalks, kind of in the downtown, but there's still issues. As you can see here, this is out near the school. What we're suggesting, because there's crashes still occurring there, more pedestrian facilities, walkways, put in high-vis crosswalks, maybe an RRFB, which are those lights when you press the button and they light up and it kind of flashes to go through. Maybe, again, put in longitudinal rumble strips or striping to let people know, as well as putting in the feedback signs. Because as you can see, kind of when you hit the edge there's a curve, and people kind of zip through that. But as you can see here, there's not the pedestrian facilities, and we want to have this to kind of connect, because this is the part that the city has under their sort of control of the town, and they want to kind of complete the PED network that's there. This other area is, again, lots of people speeding in this kind of rural corridor here. Again, when the weather's bad, it's bad, but no, it's single vehicle crashes. So, there are several things we suggested. Putting in this high friction surface treatment, putting in better striping alongside. You can see here kind of the striping is a little worn away. Putting in the speed feedback signs to slow people down in the corridor. Again, these are signs that can run now on solar, so you don't need to necessarily run electric out there, in case that would be a concern for some of the smaller municipalities in terms of maintenance. And again, in terms of keeping the rural character, we know that, again, as I just was talking about the running electric out there, that communities don't want to. They prefer to not have light poles and things like that. You can get stuff with reflective pavement. You can put it on the sides, you put it on the striping. It does help, because again, that's what we're doing. So that's Ashburnham. That's our first in-depth community. Ashby, we don't have anybody on the line, but again, these are mostly the same sorts of stuff. The main problem on these, we're just going to briefly go over, these 3 corridors, inadequate lighting, some reef paving. These are kind of the countermeasures. Again, people are crashing into utility poles, and there's curb stuff. So what we're talking about is better delineation along the curves. Stripe those curves. Put up a sign that says curve ahead. It's a kind of a one-time thing. You put in some speed feedback signs, and like our neighbors in Ashburnham this community, when we spoke with them, they said, we do not want light poles. So we are suggesting here, okay, that's fine. Every community is different. We are context sensitive. We are not here to dictate and suggest things that you're not going to like or your community won't like. So we'll find another way. We'll put reflective paint down and stripe things differently, and make sure that we have adequate lighting and notice for all the curves. So we can zip through this, because that's that. Athol, we do have somebody from Athol on the line, so we will go through this. 3 main projects here, which I'll go through again. This is a couple downtown and one on the edge, on the way into town. There's a lot of interesting sort of things happening here. This is a very sort of, it's maybe a little washed out for those in public, but this is a kind of a very dangerous sort of intersection. There's a lot of visibility questions and issues in terms of sight lines. As you can see, there's, there's a stop sign over here. If you can see it, there's a lot of people, if you're inching out, you're running the risk of getting clipped, shall we say. This also is a straightaway. People are, kind of speeding up on this. So again, and when we spoke, to the municipality, they said, yes, this is one of the biggies. This happens in clear conditions. It's not weather related. We're talking about putting on the main line here some speed feedback signs to slow people down on this. And we want to have a what we call a traffic signal warrant study to look at and say, okay, do you need a traffic sign there? Or should we put in some other sorts of things? Do we want to put in, as here the supplemental stuff, a stop ahead kind of coming at it from this way, or even, you have the crosswalk sign here, but you should also maybe have a sign delineating that here there's traffic coming towards you at this intersection, or even lighting and things like that. You can light up various stop signs. I'm sure you've seen that, those sorts of things. Some reflective stuff again. But again, this was something that the city had identified in the past. This is another sort of one. This seems to be, people going fast along this corridor here. There was even a gas spill here, or an oil spill, which was really bad. It's, people need to see the signage that there is a stop ahead here when you're going to hit Main Street, and you need to slow down, put in speed feedback signs, make sure that there's that people know there's a curve coming up before, put in those curvature signs, again, to kind of, these are happening in the daytime. These aren't happening at night. So lighting isn't an issue. It's people speeding in that. And then here we have this one. Now we know this is a massed out on road, but there's a lot of stuff going on there. Everything, on this South Main Street, 52 total crashes. That's a lot. And these, half of them happen at night. Some are with deer. There's pedestrian. Cyclists, this is a very difficult corridor, and we're going to recommend the road safety audit here because it is under MassDOT jurisdiction, and because it's so dangerous, and because there's, again, so many crashes along the corridor. So the next one is air, which also we have people from. So this kind of, there are two areas here which we will get to. One is a little more in the downtown area, which you'll see. Another is along a rotary. And as you can see on some of these maps, you will see dots. You have a...
Don't worry, I'm just checking them off for you so
you will see dots on some of these. What that indicates, it's the same sort of color scheme, right? As you see HII, those are high injury networks. So right here, that big red dot means that this is one of the 50 most dangerous intersections in the entire region. And we try to hit those. Usually that indicates there's at least one fatality there, which, again, we're in the business here of trying to reduce that. But as we mentioned, we're gonna, yes.
No, keep going.
We have various, challenges with that, especially in that, which we'll get to. But again, I wanted to draw your attention. You will see more of these dots, especially as we get into the, quote, more urban areas. So without further ado, Park Street, this is the part that they own. As you can see here, look, you've got pedestrians crossing right in the middle of the street. There's no crosswalk there. You see a bicyclist here. This is kind of suboptimal bike stuff. And you see a lot of businesses here. So what we're proposing is, okay, perhaps the right-of-way is big enough maybe to throw in a turning lane here. Again, that's a maybe. But more importantly, more crosswalk visibility. You should put in a crosswalk. Maybe you have the pedestrian, push button where you put up the lights. You know, more bicycle and pedestrian facilities. Again, slow these cars down that are coming along here, because there are pedestrians and cyclists, and also what we call corridor access management, which kind of feeds into a lot of the turning lanes. But it's basically getting the properties to consolidate driveways and to have, like, you know, minimal access points, because access egress points, because as you can see here, someone can come in and out all along this because it's a flush surface, and that can prove to be very dangerous to someone going along here and not paying attention that someone's just going to kind of come running out, shall we say. Now, the next one up is at the Carlton Circle, which down here, lots of crashes, but this is mostly owned by MassDOT. However, there are some of these legs coming off that are municipally owned. So what we want to do, because it's such a dangerous intersection, have a road safety audit here to be conducted. So now I'm seeing where Nate goes. Okay. So Clinton, we're just going to go through here. There's, again, kind of this corridor along Main Street and Brook Street, and there's this intersection here. There's timing issues here, people zipping through on these streets. As you can see, there's a lot of issues here. When you get to, excuse me, you know, again, some of the, again, are in urban areas, again, you have the access management issues, lots of driveways, which you want to kind of eliminate through access management. Again, people speeding, so you want to put in speed feedback signs, you know, and kind of putting in, you know, signal ahead maybe, stop sign ahead, so that people just aren't zipping along and kind of run through it. Down here on Berlin Street and the intersection, you know, this is very much speeding and lighting. As you can see, people seem to, this is, you know, with this corridor and the colors here, zip on up or zip on down. You know, lighting is an issue here as you're getting out of kind of the more urban area. Again, putting in either lighting or putting down some wet reflective striping and pavement markings, as well as signage, kind of like, okay, you are entering a more urban area, so, you know, stop ahead, stop sign ahead, signal ahead as you're approaching that intersection, as well as, you know, kind of on some of these, putting in things like no turn on red signs to prevent those right turns, and to, you know, when you're in an urban area, on some of these to kind of assure, because again, like, there's crashes in the dark, there's a lot of crashes at driveways, and people speed, and they you know, again, you know, kind of go right through kind of dangerous intersections, because as I guess Nate has told me and others, you know, locals know that these intersections are dangerous and know to slow down. But if, to use me as an example, if I'm coming through here and I decide to use Waze or Google Maps or whatever, and it routes me there, I don't know that and I'm just going to show this one intersection, even though this, where's the third one? Here, like, you know, it's coming up here. If I'm zipping up here, I don't know that this is coming. I could go run right into somebody, or they could run right into me. You need to have those signs that say dangerous, you know, intersection ahead, stop sign ahead, merge ahead, you know, here. That's the sort of stuff, but I digress a little. Aha, Fitchburg. Thank you for the folks from Fitchburg for coming. We've got a number of projects for you. One's down here. Then we have kind of the electric and south corridor, and then we have another, again, a bad intersection there. Now, this is, we've been told this is, you know, there are a lot of crashes around here for a number of reasons. There's a curve, there's not a sign that says vertical clearance with the kind of actual measurements on it, so people do run into, you know, the embankment or the bridge or what have you. So what we say is put more signage saying bridge ahead or curve ahead. Repaint those pavement markings along. Put in better stuff along the sides, curve ahead. Maybe put in some rumble strips in the middle, again, or striping to indicate, like to let people know, you don't depart from your lane here, because again, there's lots of these crashes. Narrow underpass at a curb, and when it gets wet or snowy, could be very dangerous. Now here, again, electric, we know that there's a number of stuff going on here. People zip through on this. Right up here, there's a nice little roundabout that, yeah, I know that there's this, but again, if you're kind of driving through, people could miss this. You need better signage. You need signage, maybe have this, and then one even closer up as you approach it, for example. Speed feedback to slow that down. People are, again, you have a lot of single vehicle crashes with ditch, trees, and utility poles along this corridor. That indicates people aren't speeding and not staying in their lanes. And again, weather seems to be a condition. Now, again, this is kind of the north-south leg of that where, you're going, electric and Winusuck and south. Again, lots of stuff there. There's a lot of crashes, again, coming in and out. We're talking about maybe are thinking about lighting, for example, paving as well, as you can see here, a lot of the cracked pavement, repainting, putting down, again, new types of pavement markings, maybe wet reflective as well, putting in some, again, as we said, retro-reflective sheeting on signposts, for advanced warning, that, okay, intersection ahead, stop sign ahead, signal ahead. And again, there's a lot of rear-end crashes from people coming in from the sides, as that is going on. But again, these are kind of overviews. This is as you can see, this is a signal sort of issue here down at Bemis Road and Airport Road. These are, freestanding sort of signals here. People disregard it. They get stuck in the intersection, as you can see here, between two different sets of signals. We want to retime these signals, or we suggest looking at retiming to make sure there's enough clearance, because all you need is one person not to to break the pattern, and well, you end up with a lot of trouble. You can see here the stops, the stuff right at the intersection. That's all worn away. There should be, much better pavement marking. Where there should be a stop bar at each side. There should be, an approach saying, stop ahead. Also here, you should have intersection guide markings showing, okay, if I'm coming here and I want to go there, do I go all the way up there? Do I cut through like that? I know I'm not exactly holding it steady, but you kind of get the picture what I'm talking about. There needs to be more guidance here to kind of, get people through the intersection safely. Again, improving that green cycle there. Again, it's timing the red and yellow, but then there's also kind of other sorts of little technology you can do to extend green time if there is enough demand in the intersection or approaching the intersection. So that's Fitchburg. So next, Gardner. Again, you can see a lot here, but we're focusing on this area, which is, again, the Timpani Boulevard and Gardner Road.
I'm just going to cross them off for you.
Okay.
Keep going.
The Gardner Road and the intersection up at Broadway. Again, there's a lot of people, inattention, failure to yield, speeding. This is the blank out signs that I sort of was talking about up here, because again, people are not seeing this. These are, coordinating right movements. There's a lot of accidents coming in and out of these are with shopping centers. So access management has actually happened here, where you have something going in, but the signal timing doesn't seem to be enough to get these people through that, or even these folks through the intersection in time. So we want to kind of fix that, as well as, again, there's other sort of ways of making these signals more prominent and hopefully getting people to obey more these signals. because again, it seems like the majority of crashes happen at these retail driveways that have signals. Okay, so you gotta improve the signals in these areas. And then again, this is actually up towards the downtown area. As you can see here, you've got signals. It's improving, like we said, at the Bemis Road and Airport and Fitchburg. You want to improve, the visual for drivers to see it, as well as timing and making sure people have enough green time to go through, and retiming the reds and the yellows to make sure. But also other things, again, coordinate when it's safe to make that right turn in some of these, because sometimes, again, people don't know. They'll just go and they're not paying attention to traffic coming this way or that way, or so those sorts of things to save. So, Groton. Okay, so Groton is basically down this corridor here along Main Street with two specific areas. Again, the boundaries of this are between Pleasant and Powderhouse Road. As you'll see, again, there's crashes. Again, this should be better striped. There should be, one of the things we suggest in the next sort of slide that you'll see is striping the actual parking spots and having kind of a no park right up at the intersection, because people end up getting involved with crashes if they're making turns and not doing the turns right. Again, putting in speed feedback, because people are just kind of zipping through this to slow people down. Here you see there's a crosswalk, but again, repaint a lot of the stuff and think about, as you see here, look at this as a huge sort of driveway. Maybe you narrow that access point. This is one of them, because it's a bigger sort of stretch. The really, and again, these are, there's 41 crashes in that whole area, but then you look and you see, oh wow, of that, 32 are at this one intersection. And as you see, you've got, this car kind of going in, again, we're talking about, as we say here, doubled up, oversized, advanced. Let people know that this intersection is coming and it's a complex one, and let them know. Slow people down with the feedback signs. Again, prohibit on-street parking near the intersections and the crosswalks, because again, this is going to be confusing to a lot of people who aren't used to this sort of intersection or this community. All right. Harvard. There are two main ones here. One's along Ayer Road and one's along Patton, and they have two very different sorts of issues going on here. Here, again, a more rural, but heading in towards Town Hall. Again, improving the delineation with striping along curves, putting in the curb warning signs. We know there's a crash that happened past this near the Town Hall. Put in those crosswalks. Think about the pedestrian buttons, the RRFBs. We know there's a proposed MassDOT shared use path coming in, or at least it's proposed to come in. So coordinate with that. Put the speed feedback signs in. Again, think about the strips and the stripes for, to keep people in the lanes. Because again, these are single vehicle crashes. This is not, which we seem to see a lot of in a lot of these more rural areas. They're single vehicle crashes, meaning people are speeding and not paying attention. And this other one, this is, again, this is in the Devens area. There's this Patton Road, there's like at least four different kind of conflict areas, ranging all the way in the west from the Jackson Road intersection. There's this, to the health center, there's an injury. People, a wrong way crash of someone, in this lane, thinking about they're gonna make a right turn there. And we know that here, it's kind of washed out on our screen here, but I know for the people at home, there's a new cut through that's been done here to kind of block off that curve, but there's still a lot of crashes heading down here. So again, things about speed feedback, slow down. There's, have an advanced intersection saying, hey, this road coming up, because it's unclear whether people knew that this is Mirror Lake Road and somebody's looking down at their phone and like, oh goodness, there it is. And they go over and they hit the guardrail in the opposite lane while they're doing it. Putting in striping for the curves. Maybe at this intersection, thinking about a dedicated left turn lane. The angle crashes at the Jackson Road, which is on the west side of it. But again, these are kind of, a lot of the stuff that we're suggesting tonight, or I would say the majority of stuff we're suggesting, these are relatively, I don't want to call them, they're non-high-tech sort of solutions, right? We're not asking necessarily at this point to come in and completely redesign the intersection. We're talking about like, we want to, the point here is to save lives, and it's going to take a long time to do a proper study and to redo the intersection. Well, what can we do in the interim? Can we put up better signage to slow people down? Can we, have those speed feedback signs? Can we have, better enforcement? Hubbard Stin, I'm looking, they are not in attendance, but as you can see here by the two bulbs here, very bad intersections. These are both in the top 50 of the most dangerous intersections here. Again, what we're seeing, crashes with deer and other animals along, potential driveways, rainy, dark conditions. So there's light. And so what we want to do is, improve the lighting. Again, based on the feedback, they're more in favor of the wet reflective markings than with actual light poles. They're putting in curve warning and restriping to make sure everybody knows that curves are coming, and putting in speed feedback signs to slow things down on these corridors. And again, there's always the option of the rumble strips and stripes. Again, that's kind of, we know that DPWs, if changing pavement, well, they may not be in favor of putting in the strip, but we can put in the stripes to let people know to slow down and to stay in their lane, shall we say. So that is that. Lancaster, nobody's here from Lancaster, but we'll just quickly kind of go through what's going on here. We've got, well, I'll start down here. These are,
Just keep going.
keep going. Down here, these are two very kind of dangerous or potentially dangerous intersections here, this Deershorn Road and Sterling Road. We know that there was a block off that was just done and it was redone, but it still looks that it could be dangerous and confusing. We recommend a road safety audit there. Here, there was also, this went from a 5-way to a 4-way intersection recently, but it is still needs a lot of work because there apparently is also some development potentially coming in. It's still confusing because even if you turn a 5 into a 4, you have the 5th kind of former spoke, coming up a couple hundred feet from the other ones, well, that could present problems if that's not signalized. This area, this is kind of extending from the Bolton Fair, and their purview, the city purview goes all the way up to here, and there are different sort of concerns. What we heard is they really want to get this area here more pedestrian facilities, especially, as it concerns connecting, the Bolton Fair and some of the more downtown areas towards here. We're looking at, again, single vehicle objects, single vehicle crashes. A lot of it is kind of approaching right before the ramp, so put in some, up to 190. So, what we would think is put in some speed feedback signs, get some better delineation of pavement markings, have big signs saying, hey, interstate coming up, ramp coming up, as opposed to, again, kind of having a, more redesigning segments. But as you can see, it is very windy here, and it's easy to kind of zip on through and, on a nice day and thinking that everything is great until, I don't know, you encounter other things like animals popping out or a car coming the other way and one of you isn't really paying attention, which is frustrating. Here we are, Leominster, our home tonight. Hi, thank you guys for having us here. in Leominster. So we spoke, and there's two major sort of things we are suggesting. I know it looks like more, but you can see all these red dots and the red areas, and it was really difficult to kind of pick. So what we're suggesting is kind of there's two things, and we'll get to this in a moment. But for the number two, where you see this, really what we want to look at is kind of more of a municipal signal timing program along some of these corridors that we've mentioned. I'll get to that in a minute. But the first and foremost was this, the Mechanic Street. We know that people use this as an alternative to the Leominster Connector. 43 crashes there, single vehicle crashes. People speed on that. People are, don't yield, there's distraction. We think you should put in speed feedbacks. You should, again, better marking. There's, little to no marking here along where's the curve, where's the lane. Repainting the stop bars, right here. There should be a stop, perhaps coming in from this side. Perhaps, again, thinking about the rumble strips or the stripes to keep people aware. That's the thing, to, make sure there's not a lane departure there. But again, we know that this is a chronic problem, because I'm going to go back here. As you can see, and you know this because you live here and you see this, there's a red dot there, there's a red dot there, there's a red dot there. So right there, people are, and this is a very dangerous sort of corridor as people are approaching it and taking it, because again, they're like, I don't want to take the Leominster Connector, I can get there, and nobody takes that, and I can just go as fast as I want. Well, unfortunately that happens to, cause trouble and has resulted in losses of life and lots of injury, and really, again. So we kind of came up with three different corridors. One is along kind of the New Lancaster corridor, as you can see here. And again, you can see that the signals are a little, they're not exactly super, how should we say, visible and prominent. You can kind of go and you can see it, but again, people aren't yielding. They're not staying in their lane. We want, again, striping here. Again, advanced detection to improve the green cycle. If there's a lot of people here, okay, give it a little more green to make sure everybody gets through. Improve the signal timing. Put the speed feedback so that before the intersections, they can't just fly up and down. Because again, it's, you don't want that. Because again, people take advantage of it. I know I do. We all do. If you can go faster, but, you shouldn't. And this is kind of the actual intersection. As you can see, look, right there at this intersection, it's, again, this is why we need to time this better. And here, you see one, but again, you need better pavement markings. There's some here, but this can still be confusing, on this, as well as kind of, intersection ahead and those sorts of things. But the key thing here is to do some retiming. Merriam Avenue, we noticed some stuff as well, although we don't really see in this part of it. But this is, again, better signage. More put up signage saying crosswalk ahead. There's no signage. If someone's zipping through, they don't know that really this isn't going to cut it. Like a little sign there with a pedestrian. You need like a big sign saying, crosswalk ahead. Maybe put up the flashing beacons. Put in the speed feedback to slow people down. Prohibit some of the parking near the intersections. But again, for a little further down, there's more issues. People are blowing through the lights, for lack of a better word. They're not, right-hand turns are notorious here. We should put no turn in, no turn on red signs at this intersection to mitigate all those crashes. Figure out timing on this, because it doesn't seem that people are getting enough clearance for that. And then we've got some Main Street stuff. Look at this, 97 crashes between Day and Prospect. A lot of a fair number of single vehicle, mostly rear end. Again, there's a lot of spillback queues between Prospect and Day. Again, delineation. We need to think about the intervals at both at the kind of the ends of it, one at Day and one at Prospect, shall we say. And again, put in signage, even when there's a minor sort of intersection. Have something saying, just even that little kind of, sign to let people know that someone may be pulling out there. And again, think of the signal timing as well as the access management, because as you can sort of see, you've got this huge parking lot here and people can kind of pull out from anywhere there. Why not, reduce some of it and have a single access point where, someone can get in and someone can get out, but you don't need the whole thing where people can come in at multiple points. This also, as you can see, confusing sort of intersection, and put in some more signage to warn there's a traffic light coming up, and you should pay attention to this. Repaint the pavement marking because, as you can see, they're kind of worn in a lot of areas. Additionally, perhaps daylight this crosswalk here, and time the interval because, again, as we see, there's a lot of rear ends. People, again, with utility poles and fixed objects, that means somebody is caught by surprise and, takes the corner going too fast, failing, or is swerving to avoid another vehicle in the intersection. So yes, that's Leominster for us. So Lunenburg, we came up with a couple of them. Again, there's Electric Avenue here, as well as this down here, the Leominster Shirley Road, also known as Shirley Leominster Road, and which also extends over into Shirley. You've got people speeding along these. What did I miss?
Nothing, you didn't say anything.
I'm sorry, apologies. But as you can see, we know that like down here you have D, this Whalum Street, this is being addressed. But there's still issues, just because you address this sort of intersection. As you can see, this is kind of a straightaway. People speed, so put in the speed feedback signs. Here, lots of curves going along here, and a lot of vegetation. So clear that off, as well as there's some repaving, putting in, delineation for the curves. Maybe even some curve warning signs, as well as intersection warning signs. We know that there was an RSA that was done right up here recently at E, and we know that some things have come to fruition there in our plan, but again, there's this corridor that we're told was, particularly dangerous. And next one, Petersham, another rural community. Again, like with many of them, the problems are lighting related and lack of signage, and people going too fast on roads where they shouldn't be going too fast. So what we want to do is put in speed feedback signs, put in, maybe some strips and stripes, put in some crosswalks and daylight the crosswalks that are there so that pedestrians aren't hit, improve some pedestrian facilities, including putting in some crosswalks, as well as, warning signs, intersection ahead, curve ahead, and showing the curve, as well as, a suggested speed they should be taking the curve at, as opposed to just leaving it to their own judgment. We think that they probably won't, in terms of lighting, they'll probably want as much as we say lighting installations, it's probably wet pavement, reflective here, markings, as opposed to posts and poles. And now we have Phillipston. Again, these are three very dangerous intersections. These are all red. This one's kind of hid. We know these two are right next to MassDOT facilities, RSAs for both of these guys. This is a very dangerous intersection. Down here, there's at least one fatality. I think there may be two, lots of serious injuries. It's a very narrow area. It's not particularly paved well. It's definitely not striped well. There's not any on either of these roads any indication that this intersection is coming up. We're talking about putting in, intersection coming up, or here's a four-way intersection. and again, striping things better so that people know, because again, this is a very, very, very narrow, this Blake Corner Road's a very narrow road. So, Royalston, again, it's a community that is very rural. As you can see, the intersections the incidents are around curves and around hitting trees and other fixed objects, meaning people are going too fast along these corridors. So what you need is better signage. Again, there's always the possibility of rumble strips and stripes, but put in the delineation for the curbs using striping. Put in those warning signs, curve ahead 15 miles an hour, or one of those. Intersection ahead, as well as other, and speed feedback signs, of course, to slow that kinetic energy down, which, as you can see here, again, this is just an example, I know, but this is kind of if you're on the main road, you're not paying attention to this car as they're inching out. Shirley, we have someone on the line from Shirley. So we have 3 project areas, which we'll get to. We know that there's been some work here at this intersection, Groton Road and Townsend Road. We are also keyed into this down here. This is a continuation of the Leominster Road project in Lunenburg. And then along here, the Great Road, we know this is MassDOT owned, but we have, there are some things we wanted to discuss there. So again, we know that there's a lot of crashes there. We know there's single vehicle crashes. Put in advanced warning signs. Again, just because you kind of deal with the intersection itself doesn't mean that you can't improve the approaches. Put in that advanced, the flashing beacon approaching it, stop ahead, oversized, speed feedback signs to slow them down as they're coming. As you can see, vegetation here, that's going to be visual obstruction. Should get rid of that. There's always putting in various rumble strips or striping to kind of make sure that vehicles stay in their lane and don't begin, going in other people's lane, shall we say. Again, coming kind of at the perpendicular of that. There are other crashes. Again, you deal with the intersection, but you also want to deal with the approaches. Put in the speed feedback to slow that traffic coming in and out of that intersection at Townsend and Groton Road. Put in the striping here. See, here you have some striping, but you should have better. Maybe, again, to keep people in their lane, put in some rumble strips or have some sort of striping. Again, kind of maybe of the high friction type. I see somebody with their hand up. Nate, should we take a question?
I mean, we're closing to the end, but sure.
We're on S. Okay. All right. This is one. The second is the Leominster Shirley Road, which again is kind of that continuation. As you can see here, and it's difficult to see, this is running through wetlands. So the surface is going to be an issue. You need better, we're not going to kind of solve that problem necessarily here right now with this, but what we could do is we slow people down. You use speed feedback signs. You get rid of a lot of this vegetation, because these do have guardrails. You put in the wet reflective pavement, because there's no sort of lighting along the stretch, and again, at night, could be bad. Even though 7 out of 9 happen during the daytime, which means people are going too fast. They're not, they're taking this curve far too fast in the woods, shall we say, and losing control. This road is not designed to be taken at 50 miles an hour. That's just plain. So we know that this is an issue along the Great Road. We know that there's a lot of intersections that people are running into, but this is a MassDOT-owned facility, and there's been a bike crash there. We want to make sure, again, that MassDOT is aware of this and have a road safety audit. This is one of the things that was brought up to us when we mentioned, but this is a MassDOT facility. It's like, this is really important in our downtown area. We need to address this somehow. So our suggestion is to do road safety. I see Nate's still going, so I will go. We'll get the question later. Here we've got three sort of areas again. As you might imagine, it's a similar sort of area, sort of concern in a sort of a less urban area, shall we say. There's a lot of issues with lighting, curvy roads, especially down here, this last one, Greenland Road between Boutel Road and Route 12. There's a lot of funky intersections down here. There's a 5-way and a 6-way intersection. Problem here is, right here where this big dot is, this is a MassDOT road, so we want to suggest an RSA there. But in these other ones, put in wet reflective markings. Again, curves, speed feedback signs to slow people down. Put in advanced warning signs for curves, for upcoming intersections, for stops, because again, that's what's happening in those sorts of areas, unfortunately. And we are in Templeton. Thank you for Templeton. So here, I can start backwards. Central State, we know that this is a MassDOT facility, but this again seems to be a critical area of lots of crashes. People are zipping through, exceeding the speed limits, not yielding. We should have an RSA here. Same here, this is much more rural. People are not taking these curves far too fast. We need to put in the curve signs. We need to put in better delineation and striping for the lanes when you do curbs. Again, better pavement markings, rumble strips. Put in those, wet pavement markings for reflection to move forward, at night. So avoid those rollover crashes, which are very dangerous. Townsend, which is one we do have represented. So we have three sort of suggestions here, excuse me. And one of them is up here on Greenville Road. Again, there's nighttime collisions. These are very rural sort of areas. We know that this corridor gets slightly busy. We know people use this corridor as a cut through, kind of right from here and down, that kind of traffic here. This accident is probably caused by traffic here. Somebody's cutting through and zipping down. This is, not well lit, not well signed. Again, there's collisions with trees at night, people, striking other things. Again, fixed objects off the roadway in Greenville. That means people are going too fast. They're taking the curbs too fast. You need to put in the stripe edges. You can see you can't see the striping there on the sides. Improve the lighting. Put in the wet reflective pavement lighting. Put in speed feedback signs to slow people down. Let them know that this intersection is upcoming, that there's kind of a jog coming off this and there will be some cross traffic. This is Brookline Street, kind of also coming down, a little bit coming down from New Hampshire as well. Similar sorts of things to be recommended, but again, there's a lot of head-on collisions and fixed objects. I mean, people are going too fast and they run into the guardrail. They take the curve too fast. Speed feedback signs. I know I sound like I keep repeating myself, but these are proven techniques that will save lives. Full stop. Put in the pavement markings so that people can see at night better. Because again, this is a rural area. We don't expect lighting necessarily to be put in there. Put in better signs about this curves, as well as maybe a recommended sign saying, take this at 15 miles an hour. Don't try to zip through this at 45 miles an hour. And then we have this intersection that's kind of out in this is that intersection, as I said, that's connected to the previous one, where there's literally no signage whatsoever, and people just are using this as a cut through, and they will hit some, like right here, you can see this is kind of where it is. It's washed out a little bit here, but it's not signed. There should be, intersection warnings. Heck, there should probably be a stop sign there. Pavement marking. There is no pavement marking whatsoever on the approaches here. There's no lighting. That should be done there too, because we know that people are using that as a cut through. And we know that, again, as you saw, that big red dot, that's one of the 15 most dangerous intersections in the region. And now we have Westminster, which folks are, so we know that this here is under MassDOT control, but what we're looking at here isn't an RSA necessarily. This is more of access management. Okay?
Ready to wrap it up?
Yep, got one more after this. This is access management here. You know, consolidate those driveways. Figure that out. That doesn't, you don't need to touch the MassDOT facility, shall we say, to do that. You're dealing with individual property owners. Here, you see this big red dot. That's the bad crashes there. Again, when we spoke with the folks at Westminster, they're like, oh yeah, that's near the brewery. Okay. You know, literally that's what they said. Speed feedback signs, put in signage, you know, at this sort of intersection, you know, intersection ahead, you know, delineate that, you know, put in lighting or put in the reflective pavement so we can get there. And then we'll get to Winch and Dunn, which is, there's really three sort of things. These two, this is a state-owned roads, but we know these are problems, and they're really, we'll get to that these are gonna get RSAs. This is a different one. It's a similar sort of thing as we said. Look at this. 2/3 of this are single vehicle crashes. Dark roadway, so there's not any lighting here. So put in the wet reflective pavement. Repave some of it, as you can see. It's that put in supplemental signage, put in the curb sign saying curbs ahead, remove the vegetation. People, you know, cross the border maybe and speed up, you know, or aren't paying attention. All these off-road crashes lead us to believe people are just going too fast and they're not taking an adequate sort of, as it would say, you know, respect for the road and its limitations of its geometry. This is a difficult intersection we know down here. It's right next to MassDOT facilities, road safety audit. This needs to be really, there's some creative ways to deal with this, especially with differences in elevation here. This drops down to the river, this goes up a hill, this was, you know, one of these was blocked off recently, but again, road safety audit. This here too, as you can see, this is a path right up here, you know, a nice multi-use path here, but people aren't, you know, this sort of intersection, you know, why isn't it just straight in here? You've got coming in this way, you've got coming in this way, potential two ways. This is confusing, but again, road safety audit, because this is intersection. This is not MassDOT, but this is, and this is dangerous. Now, prioritizing. Should I?
Yeah, you take that part and
So again, what you had just saw here were, again, we didn't start with this sort of thing, unless you think that like we came up with only 3 projects. Most of these places, you know, when we began generating, and Brian and George and others, and those of you who were in on our meetings can attest, you know, we had 7 or 8 per community. We winnowed those down. We're gonna, by the end of the summer, we're gonna have a finalized list. But the question is like, how do you determine which should be done first, which should have the most priority? There are many ways to kind of do this. We, after we consulted with MRPC, we decided we're going to go with, we use the benefit cost ratio, BCR. Your neighbors at NIMCOG used it, which is the Lowell Metropolitan Planning Organization. We want to hear from you about that, if, you know, see if you're okay with that. But basically what it is you figure it out, you estimate how much is this improvement going to cost, right? You say, okay, I'm going to put in pavement, I'm going to put in a traffic light, it's going to cost this amount of money in terms of capital cost and for maintenance. Then you look at measures of effectiveness. Like we said, every one of those countermeasures has you know, an official sort of you know, crash reduction factor. How many lives are we saving? You know, how's that affecting people's quality of life? So you kind of, you take those, you turn that kind of into a quantifiable benefit, and then you do a little division, right? You do, again, some discounting, and you know, you divide the benefits by, you know, the lives saved and the quality of life by how much the capital cost is, and you end up with a ratio. Again, this is one way to do it. This is the way that MRPC has decided. Again, this is kind of just what I said there. You know, RSA again. Because we're suggesting not just one countermeasure per project. You're going to kind of add all that together. Additionally, there's an additive and even multiplicative sort of impact on safety. I think a lot of them, there's, with the way we calculate them, it is multiplicative as opposed to just additive. So, that even increases in, you sum the costs, you sum the benefits. As I said, this, again, is kind of more detail than you need, and you end up with things. Now, this is the example, kind of, from your neighbors. They don't have as many communities. They only had 8 or 9. And, ultimately, it's like, okay, from here to here, here's the corridor. It's from this point to this point. Here's where, is suggested. And here's, kind of the benefits that get estimated in terms of dollars using the FHWA and FTA factors. And then you have the cost based on unit cost and industry cost. And then you have a ratio. And then you can kind of prioritize them and rank them as such. And that's how we've decided we're going to go ahead and do that here in your region. But again, that is, again, on a regional level. This is how we're going to prioritize things regionally. Nate's going to kind of talk now about next steps and how we think about things at the municipal level, perhaps. So.
Thank you very much, Bruce. That
Sure.
was a heroic effort to get through a lot very quickly.
Stay up here.
Okay, so just a couple more slides here. And there were 2 things that I wanted to emphasize as we get into this. One term that popped into my mind when Bruce said it, because he is a technical man, and it may not be a term that has come to all of you, is he said to daylight a crosswalk. What does it mean to daylight a crosswalk? Well, when you daylight a crosswalk, it means you do things which back potential obstructions away from that crosswalk where it meets the sidewalk, such that when a motorist is approaching the crosswalk, there's a longer distance at which the driver can see the pedestrian stepping out. So in an urban area, that means that if it used to be that cars could park right up to that crosswalk, it means that suddenly you establish a no parking zone kind of buffering that crosswalk so that now I can see that pedestrian for a longer distance as I approach the crosswalk. That's daylighting a crosswalk. The other thing that I just want to underscore for everybody is if you saw an intervention tonight and you thought to yourself, boy, I go through there all the time, and I liked 2 of the things that were proposed, but there was a 3rd piece there that I know for whatever reason just won't work. Each one of these projects, even if we leave tonight and we were to carry one of these projects out on its shoulders and say, rah, rah, let's go do it right now, there is still the need to apply for funding in next year's grant cycle. There would still be the need to go do a full design process. So if there's some detail in one of these that you don't love, or that you want to make bigger, or shrink, or change in some regard, there will be a whole design process. If you've ever been through a roadway design process, there are public meetings, there's a 25% design public hearing, there's a process that will come after this. So I just want everybody to know that what you're seeing tonight, this isn't your last chance to influence these projects. So the short-term steps, right? Take your input tonight. Grant has been answering some chat questions that have come in over Zoom. We appreciate folks' feedback. Thank you. We'll refine the list of projects further, based on what people say to us tonight. There may be some need to have follow-up meetings with the communities, right? If we get feedback from folks tonight in the community, from the audience, from the public, where we had municipal feedback that said, oh boy, we really like this, but the public really doesn't, and we have to balance that. Right? We have to develop the draft regional safety action plan. That's really the next big thing. We have to come up with this plan document that we've been talking about. That has to be presented to our Vision Zero Action Committee. It then gets presented formally to the public, and that inaugurates a 21-day comment period. The goal is a formal plan adoption by the MPO at their September meeting. We finalize the plan report, and there's a dashboard website which everybody gets to follow with the projects once they are formally in there. Now, in the long term, thinking to 2026. As Brian said, the role of MRPC and Mart really begins to change tonight. To date, they've been the leader here. They've been driving the bus. Post-plan adoption, the responsibility really starts to shift to the individual towns to pursue these projects. Individual towns can reference the plan and say, hey, look, these projects are in the plan. We'd like to pursue this. There's at least one more funding cycle under this program in 2026, after which we don't know what may happen to this program, but we know there's at least one more round. So MRPC can help with the grant application, right? But each town has to be responsible for its own application. At the end of the day, it has to be signed by, somebody at the town who says, yep, I'm with Fitchburg and I approve. And increasingly, towns and residents will need to play a more active role in the process. MRPC ultimately can't, because they don't have jurisdiction over these roads, they can't apply for a grant to go make some change on a road in an individual town. So that's just to say that, once this plan's adopted, it kind of goes to all of you to, kind of make it yours. And that's why we wanted to share these all with you tonight. So with that, we've had a whirlwind through this Q&A. Yes, ma'am, please.
What is the process for towns to adopt the plan? Is that vote, or is it done by the officials?
Yes, certainly. I'm just going to repeat that for the folks at home on Zoom. So the question that was asked was, what is the process for the towns to adopt the plan? Does it go to a formal town vote? So adoption of the Regional Safety Action Plan that we're talking about tonight, that's done at the MPO level. All right? So that's the Metropolitan Planning Organization. Once they adopt it, then the individual towns are able to point to that and say, okay, enshrined in this planning document that's been adopted by the MPO, of which we are a member, are these projects. And we would like to pursue funding under this program to go after these projects. And you can then apply to the Federal Highway Administration to get money to implement the projects.
It does, I guess.
Please.
I guess the short answer is it does not necessarily have to go to a town vote, right? This could be your DPW and your city council or various staff saying, hey, we have a shot at getting this money, let's apply for this. Ultimately, again, as you go further down and you get into a design process, that's probably going to have to, you're going to have public hearings, but this is just to apply, after this gets adopted to be like, okay, should we, we pointed that out. That looks like we would be competitive for that, and you have civic staff kind of prepare that application and apply for those grants. The same way they apply for other sorts of grants. Not every grant has to go through city council or town meeting or what have you. Again, again, every municipality is different. So different municipalities have different sorts of ways of doing things. But the short answer is no, they don't necessarily have to have a public process and have a public vote. They're just applying for this grant. Now, once they get the grant, that's a different story.
Yes, sir, please. So the thought is that, we're trying to have 2 per town, 2 or 3 to be equitable, to distribute them evenly across the communities. That's our goal. There are some issues in that, we're trying, there's some limitations in terms of applying this particular type of money to state roadways, and there need to be enough problem crashes not on a state roadway for us to make an intervention. So in some of the very small communities, we're almost strapped to find something, and then in some of the big communities, it's almost hard to find which one should we pick first. So it's a little bit less Euclidean than we might like, but yeah, 2 or 3.
So, that application process, do you find
No, a community could theoretically apply for, you know,
Right,
hey,
but
we
when
wanna-
you make the grant,
Please.
when you make the application, you say, okay, hi, here's the program we want. You know, I don't want to say it could have, you know, in theory, it could have as many projects as they want if a community is kind of applying for it on their own, right? But what we're doing here is having two or three. But like, again, a community is applying and, you know, there's this amount of money, you know, when the money becomes available, it's kind of, okay, here is the total amount and communities can apply for however much they want. Now, it could be something enormous, you know, we've seen that in some of the grants, those don't usually get them because there's some sort of formula that goes on at Federal Highway that they try to be equitable in terms of distributing to between rural areas and urban areas, and they're not giving all them to do, you know, a huge interchange somewhere in a big urban, in a downtown area, shall we say, in a very urban downtown area. They want to, again, kind of be more equitable. But, you know, in terms of, like we did with Leominster, the example there, kind of coming up with a package. As you may remember, we kind of were like, at heart, what's going on here is the signal time. So let's say we're going to have a municipal signal timing, and it's going to be these 3 corridors. As opposed to having 3 individual corridors, you have, you know, 3 different projects, you got 1 project there. You know, again, it's a matter of bundling and kind of thinking about it in that way, and we're open to hearing sort of suggestions for that, you know, in terms of, you know, how we come at it. But again, like our charge here, you know, again, kind of set by MRPC way back when in the RFP was 2 or 3 projects per community. Now, how you define projects is, like I said, having a systematic sort of way. But
Grant, do you have any you'd like to read from Zoom?
Yeah, we have a question online. Are we seeing MRPC shrinking in size? I have an $8 million road reconstruction project in Ashburn. Is that in jeopardy? That's from Douglas Briggs.
I think, please come up and answer. Go ahead, come on.
Brian,
Yeah, Brian, you should answer that.
Okay, so I think that's in reference to a TIP project that we have, and this is a totally separate program. It's federal money, but this is a total separate, outside of what we typically see in our region through the TIP. So no, that's not in jeopardy, as long as the design process continues on that Ashburnham project on 101 that he's referring to. So no, that's totally separate.
We are not allowed to answer questions about MRPC's checkbook.
anybody else?
Anyone further on Zoom?
So just another sort of thing is, you know, you kind of mentioned the tip there. You know, this sort of, you know, this action plan that we're developing, you know, it's not, even though it's geared toward SS4A, it's, you know, this sort of grant, you know, what we're doing is defining these big safety problems and how to intervene. This could, you know, again, see further study. If it doesn't make it in the SS4A, maybe the communities rally and think about it, say, you know, this is a really big problem. We really need to tackle it. Ultimately, I don't know, maybe sometime in the future it makes it on a tip or something like that. That's not out of the realm of possibility. We are, you know, identifying problems and issues here, you know, based on this sort of program. But that's not to say that if this program doesn't deal with it, the regional planning agency and even municipalities can deal with it in other things. We're not just, this document is not just for this program, right? We've identified where some really bad things are happening and where people are getting killed or seriously injured, and we want to change that. And you know, if it's not done here, well, take that knowledge and take the information that we have and say, hey, look at this benefit cost ratio. If, you know, municipality X, if you just do this, you know, can you, you know, figure this out? Can you figure out a way to talk to MassDOT to try to make that happen, or talk to your friendly folks at MRPC. Again, this is not just, kind of a one-time thing. This is, I would say, a living document, but it's a document to be referred to for a good long time as to where are the problem spots on local roads and how potentially could you address them using these kind of, I don't want to call them low cost, but, kind of quick build, techniques, countermeasures that are proven. So without completely redoing an interchange, shall we say, well, it's not an interchange because we're not doing highways, but redoing an intersection. If you put down pavement markings, if you put in lights or reflections and reflective markings and fix the signal timings, what are you going to get for that? How many lives are you going to save? And carry that forward as time goes on. I see Grant has a question.
A regional problem is heavy freight vehicles using narrow local roads as cut-throughs. This endangers vulnerable road users as well as cars/drivers. 4 feet move-over regulations don't work when vehicles are enormous. The region needs a plan to funnel heavy freight to appropriate roadways and keep them off narrow local roads.
Yeah, thanks. That's a regional issue we've been aware of. There's a number of warehouses going in. Some of the smaller communities are concerned about that, so that's more of a regional issue. This particular program is focused on more site-specific locations. So by virtue of having some of these locations identified in this plan that we just went over tonight, those are qualified now through the Safe Streets for All program. The freight issues that exist in some communities, and we could see that as a growing issue as well. We're aware of that. We recently just did a large freight study in the sort of the eastern portion of the region, so that all comes back to that. We're aware of those issues. We're aware of new developments that are popping up that may contribute to additional issues and the effects on those roads from freight traffic. As for the Safe Streets for All, it's largely informed by crash data, among other things. So hopefully we have some buy-in from communities to get money for these specific locations. Maybe not exactly what the countermeasures are tonight, but we hope there's interest in pursuing those funds for these particular instances.
That is it for our Zoom questions.
And the one thing I would remind folks is that when we did reach out to the communities, between January and April, to kind of tighten the focus for these projects, we specifically did ask about whether they had, warehouses or, what they call fulfillment centers, where Amazon originates, packages. We said, do you have anything planned, or do you have anything, in the pipeline for expansion? So, MRPC, has that information in hand. And fairly recently, to Q1 of this year. So, they're hyper aware of it and focused on it.
Right. And I would also add kind of, in the areas where we know that it's an issue and there are accidents that we've identified, we can, again, I hate to say, using kind of some of these low cost sort of things. I know many of you have seen some of these in other parts where there's a sign that literally says factory or warehouse or heavy truck traffic ahead, right? And, has like a little perpendicular like this, and it's trucks coming out, so that people aren't taken by surprise when all of a sudden these semis come up onto their road, right? And to as well kind of have signage and slow people down while that's happening, or if it's at an intersection saying, hey, wait a minute, we've got more of those vehicles coming through there, and we know it's a problem. How do we adjust the green time for that to make sure that truck makes it all the way through, as opposed to like, oh yeah, the truck's going to get caught halfway between and somebody's not going to pay attention and hit it, clip it. Those are things we can kind of address, knowing again where as Nate had said, we had asked, where's this stuff going in? Yes, it's we're aware of the narrow sort of things, but we can do some things with striping and lighting and signage that can improve things, short of, you know, redoing an entire road, shall we say, or again, as Brian said, you know, they've looked at separate freight studies to kind of look and say, all right, you know, where is it a problem? How are we going to address this? So, again, like where it intersects, I guess the short answer is where it intersects with us, we can try to, with the areas, we can try to address it in several ways. So.
So we're currently clear on Zoom. If there's anything else from the seats,
One over there.
please. Yep. Certainly. So you know,
point.
so the general point is that, you know, this discussion of the rumble strips, you know, down the center line, you know, no big deal. Some of these roadways that we're talking about are already quite narrow to begin with, and that if they're down the side, in addition to being narrow, they're also scenic, which means that folks for whom a good Saturday is 50 miles on a bicycle with skinny tires, you know, we don't want to force them further out into the lane, because if they ride in the shoulder, they're riding on a washboard. Which is, you know, one of the reasons that I brought up at the beginning, you know, right before Q&A, which is the idea that, you know, even if we look at one of these projects tonight and say, well, that's great, let's go do it right now, there still needs to be a whole design process. So, you know, if we choose one of these for implementation, you know, there would be an effort to go out, look at it fully, measure the corridor, say, okay, if we implement these rumble strips, you know, will there be enough space? Will it still be a multimodal corridor? Will it be able to function safely? The other thing you brought up is signage, right? We are context sensitive here. We recognize that a lot of these roadways do have a rural character, right? You know, Bruce spent a lot of time talking about the idea that, you know, street lighting may not be appropriate for all this. You know, you don't want a long line of poles and lights, you know, every so odd 25, 50 feet like you have out in front of City Hall here. Some of these roads, you know, they're supposed to be dark at night. They're country roads. But if you're driving along with your high beams on, you want to see those reflectors in front of you. And so a part of this, you know, we talked a lot about signage, but how much signage is too much? Right. The idea is not to make this look like the approach to Logan with, you know, all the terminal signs. So, you know, there are people that would be brought in at a stage of design to analyze all that, make sure that it was enough, but not too much, because at some point, you know, what's the poem? I think I'll never see a billboard as lovely as a tree. You know, at some point it just becomes visual clutter and the drivers stop paying attention to it, and you've gone through the looking glass and they're not paying attention again. So, you know, to balance those things out, and there are things that, you know, you've told us about in terms of the corridor that we talked about, right? That Shirley-Lunenburg Road that, you know, can't be addressed through this project, right? The fact that it's an old plank turnpike road, that there's culverts underneath. There's what we can do through this, like we were just talking about with the trucks. But all of these projects would have to go through the full design process so that they could be constructed. There's nothing up here tonight that a general contractor, no matter how talented, could look at it and go, okay, guys, start shoveling over there, you know? So we would have to go deal with all that, and things like what you brought up, and probably stuff that we haven't even thought about tonight, would come up through those processes. So thank you for saying it again, though. So I think at 7 minutes of 8, unless, Grant, there's anything further on Zoom. Sir, you look like you have... No?
Any more questions? Anybody?
So this was a really good meeting. And I want to thank everybody for coming out on a damp, nasty night.
And for calling in on
Yep,
Zoom
and for
too.
calling in on Zoom. I know that if you work a desk job, you've probably already had 6 Teams calls already today, and you're about to lose it. Brian, you want to take us home?
Sure, yeah, I'll just quickly say, so our role in this, we're drafting this plan, endorsing it, and then that's available to all of you. So we'll be in contact. You've probably seen some of my emails, some of Nate's emails, so we'll be in contact. You know, when the next notice of funding opportunity is available, we'll make sure people get that and probably get another copy of the projects that we identified in our plan. So, you know, we're taking on that role, and hopefully the municipalities take it and apply for the funds as well. So, thanks everyone for tonight, coming tonight.